So I will first give the floor to Tetiana Yanubovich, and I will ask her to introduce herself first and then to present her paper.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tetiana Yakubovich. I'm journalist and editor of the project Radio Donbass Realities of the Ukrainian Service of Radio Liberty. Today I'll talk about the report of our friends and colleagues from Democracy Development Initiative, but I also will show some things from my own experience as journalist who worked with this topic. And I will need the screen share. If it is possible. It works, yes. So the first thing that we need to know, speaking about the situation with COVID-19 in occupied areas of Donbass, tell me please, do you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Or no? Yeah. The first important thing is that testing at that areas are very rare thing, and laboratory analysis for COVID-19 are not available for most people who live there, and it doesn't matter free or paid. So we really do not know true situation with COVID-19 and how many diagnoses are there. Officially, military groups state that there are less than 3,000 cases of COVID-19. Mostly they say about pneumonia or some respiratory diseases, but not COVID. But as journalists, we know real cases of death and illness, people who have very close to COVID-19 symptoms, but no one from them were suggested to do the test. As relatives of these people describe, infection departments of hospitals are overcrowded. For example, one woman spent all the night at the chair, not only in bed, and doctor didn't come to her. Another example, one man, his father was ill, and this man scared doctors with allegedly relations with Russian militants in order to make them hospitalize his father. He lied, but he told them, I know some people, some military, they will punish you in order to give help to his father. Other woman told us that doctors said to her and her husband, who was ill, that they could not write down the diagnosis pneumonia, not even COVID-19, but pneumonia, because they have some maximum number of diagnosis pneumonia that each hospital can write down. And this doctor was not allowed to put this diagnosis. Till October, there were practically no quarantine measures in occupied Donbass. And I'll show you, if it is possible, one photo from ordinary bus in Donetsk. It was made in August, and as you see, this woman is without protective mask. Masks were not required in transport and markets, and only about a month ago, military groups started to demand this, and they now carries out such raids in public places to check how people wear protective masks. Interest moment is that information politics of Russian-controlled administration in Donetsk and Lugansk is different. In Donetsk, the topic of the pandemic is not hushed up. So they state that the problem is, it is huge, and at least they try to scare people, to ask them, be careful. In Lugansk, tactics is strange. Official propaganda doesn't say out loud the word COVID-19, and we don't understand why. Sometimes you can see the next pictures from official, so-called official propaganda of LPR, when we see doctors in protective suits in infections departments of hospitals. And in reports of their TV is said that there are many people with pneumonia and it is dangerous. They say about some red zone and tell different heroic stories about medics. But then we hear, and 2 cases of COVID-19 were identified last day. And people do not understand why it is a problem. Only 2 cases during the day we have, and such overcrowded hospitals, some heroic stories about doctors. We don't know why do they act so and what effect do they try to cause, but it is such situation. A few words about how do medical system in non-controlled Donbass look like. It is in general Soviet-style system declared to be free, but after the Russian occupation of territories, these areas lost Ukrainian state financing. Also, medical reform didn't take place there as it was in Ukraine after 2014. And the third point is that many medics have left the territory after the war started. That's why Donetsk and Lugansk medical care system is very poor. So doctors are there, they work, but they help how they can. In spring and summer, when epidemic in Ukraine just progressed, we got this photo from doctors of Lugansk. It is photo from emergency medical station of Lugansk. And here you see protective coat of doctor that is disinfected near the clothes of medics. Strange situation. And they also claimed that they have very poor protective equipment at all. Also, deficit of medicine is often detected in the territory. In general, Russian-controlled administration provide pharmacy with medicine produced in Russia or in local farm fabrics at that territory. Before the pandemic, when checkpoints with controlled territory were open, people often delivered pills from Ukrainian controlled territory. And every person who have relatives in Donetsk and Lugansk know this, that people always ask to carry some medicine from Ukrainian controlled territory. But now, as you know, checkpoints are closed and people often do not, they don't have this medicine from Ukraine and they ask relatives to bring it from Russia. But also we often hear from them that Russian analogs works worse than Ukrainian analogs that they used before the war. Also, we understand that some imported medicine are delivered to Ukraine free and people buy them here. And on the other side, now we hear that Russian drug Coronavir is in pharmacies free in occupied territories. This drug is stated by Russia as effective from COVID-19, but we don't know exactly is it so, but you can really buy this drug in Lugansk and Donetsk. I'll say some words about a problem with checkpoints at the contact line, because why it is so important for people at occupied territories. Many pensioners in so-called Ordlo get Ukrainian payments, and after the line was closed, they cannot get these payments because bank system and cash machines are only at Ukrainian-controlled part of the country. And now new business is widespread in Donetsk and Lugansk. It is cashing when pensioners pay some percent to dealers in some kiosks, and they get money through their bank cards. Another solution is big journey to Ukraine-controlled territory from the Russian territory, and it is the first point, very expensive. It costs more than $100 to one side. It is also very long and lasts more than 24 hours to get here. And the third important thing it is that it is illegal and it is punishable by fines by Ukrainian border service. Ukraine reopened checkpoints in Donbass after a big quarantine, and now Ukraine is ready to keep them opened, all the checkpoints, but now situation is so that they are blocked by Russian-controlled forces at the other side. Another important point is that more than 200 captives are still in prisons in Donetsk and Lugansk, and these people are not only deprived from medical care, but they are also cruelly tortured, as you can know from those who were liberated, and this problem is still actual. And last, a few words about documents in occupied areas. As we see as journalists and researchers, the sphere of use of Ukrainian documents is decreasing now. First, so-called documents of LPR and DNR were needed to get Russian passports. But now Russian control administration are forcing residents to register to electronic queue for these documents. And as Democracy Development Initiative think, it may be such a hidden way of control people because they get list of people. And also administration demand from some categories of people, these are state workers in general, to get these so-called documents, and they need to go to try to get them. The last thing that I would like to stress is how community can help in this situation. Of course, this problem is very huge and need political solutions. But what about small steps that can help people now? I think it would be very good to organize some hotline for distance consulting people in occupied Donbass in questions of COVID-19. We as journalists try to find doctors who were able to spend some time for free to talk to people who are without medical care at all. But it is a bit complicated task. And if some humanitarian organization could help with it so that, that people do not feel abandoned there and had some way to get qualitative but distance consulting, it would be great. Thank you for this platform, and you may find more information in report of Democracy Development Initiative and also at RFRL website, very interesting human stories about life in occupied areas.
Thank you very much, Tetiana, for this very detailed picture of various aspects of the humanitarian situation in Donetsk and Lugansk, and especially as well for the proposals that you are making at the end of your presentation to provide some assistance to the populations that are in a really difficult situation. I would like now to give the floor to Elena Shishkina, who is the Advocacy Coordinator at the Right to Protection Charitable Foundation in Ukraine.
Good evening. I would like to ask Tatiana not to share her screen if it's possible, because I see her presentation. Mm-hmm. Possible? Tatiana?
Yeah. I see that it is stopped. Maybe I don't understand, but here is stopped. Can you switch me off?
Yeah, okay. Yes. Yeah, it's good now.
No?
Yeah.
No, it's still there.
It's still, yes.
I don't understand why.
Okay, let me see if I can stop it now. Does that maybe help?
Oh,
and now turn it on again.
Good.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I didn't make any presentation, so I will just speak, and my speech will be dedicated to Actually, some problems with the crossing and freedom of movement of persons who live on NGCA and when they arrive to GCA. And I'd like to say that I will use another acronym, not ORDLO, but for ORDLO, the acronym will be NGCA, non-government controlled area, and for Ukrainian territory, GCA, government controlled area. So I have some reasons to do this, but in order to not to waste my time, I will I just mention. And I'd like to divide my my speech on two parts, because the first I will present some problems, some different problems regarding freedom of movement through the contact line. And the first part will be dedicated to the general situation on ECP's crossing. And the second one regarding the administrative fines for violating of the procedure for entering and leaving the NGCE. Regarding the first part of my speech, of my oral presentation, I'd like to say that just to say, present some numbers, just to compare the situation that it was previously before quarantine measures and the situation that it is now, so it's current situation. I'd like to say that the number of persons who crossed the line of contact in last year was more than almost 14 million of persons. From January till March of this year, 2020, more than 2.5 million of persons crossed the line of contact. However, on March 22, due to quarantine measures, because of COVID pandemic, all 5 entrance-exit checkpoints, ECPs, along the line of contact were closed for crossing. And it gave birth to some negative consequences, because it was a sudden decision of Ukrainian government, and it provoked a very negative consequences for persons who crossed the line of contact back and forth. So no matter what side, but they were all affected by this quite negative, spontaneous and sudden, actually, governmental decision. So this decision gave birth to some consequences, like freedom of movement of persons was restricted. Families were separated, and some individuals stuck on GCA or NGCA without housing, costs for living, medical care, etc. People haven't any possibility to come back for visiting their relatives, for instance, particularly elderly people who were left on GCA or NGCA. They couldn't have any access to social benefits, to pensions, to administrative services, medical care, etc. And the crossing was allowed only for humanitarian reasons, like serious illness, death of relatives, or the need to reunite families. Regarding this, in April-May of 2020, only 297 persons crossed the line of contact through ECPs. So if we compare the numbers, so we see that less than 300 of persons could cross the line of contact in 2 months. However, on June 10th, the ECPs were reopened, but only 2 of them were operational. One in Luhanska Oblast, I mean Stanitsa Luhanska, and one in Donetska Oblast, I mean the ECP Novotroitsky. From June till October, more than 2,100 persons crossed the line of contact through opened ECPs. So as well, if we compare the numbers with previous year, we see that this number is highly decreased. However, on October 15th, the unique ECP in Luhanska Oblast, Stanitsa Luhanska, was closed due to quarantine restrictions. Although on November 10th, 2 new ECPs in Luhanska Oblast, Zolote and Shastya, were opened from the GCA side, they remain closed from the NGCA side, as Tatiana mentioned previously. So as we can see, there is no crossing through these 2 new ECPs. And I'd like to say that due to quarantine measures, persons crossing the line of contact from NGCA to GCA have another problem regarding quarantine, regarding other legislative provisions regarding quarantine. First of all, they must install the application Act at Home on their smartphones and indicate the location for their self-isolation. It's a legislative provision, it's legislative requirement for them. If they don't, they have to undergo the 14-day self-isolation observation in locations provided by local authorities on GCA, or they have to return on NGCA. Our monitors, I mean the charitable fund Right to Protection, provides monitoring on all ECPs along the line of contact, and we have monitors who are there and they assist persons who arrive from NGCA to GCA, and they observe many problems regarding the application Act at Home. I just mentioned some of them, the most typical problems. The first one is that old versions of smartphones do not support the application. In this case, individuals are not allowed to cross through ECPs. So either they have to install this application or they have to return to NGCA. Observatories for undergoing observation, 14-day observation, specifically in Luhansk Oblast, are absent or overcrowded. In case individuals are not allowed to cross ECP, they have to stay for a night in a neutral zone between GCA or NGCA. So it's like a zero checkpoint, we call it like this. So, and they they need face another problems. For instance, if they have old versions of smartphones, so they have to get somehow the new version of smartphone. Or if they are not instructed how to use application Act at Home, they address our monitors there and our monitors assist. Unfortunately, this problem remains. It's not solved yet, and we don't see actually any governmental decisions how to improve the situation and how to help people who arrive from NGCA to GCA not to be discriminated with regards to other citizens of Ukraine and foreigners who come to Ukraine, and foreigners don't have such obligation. So that's a problem. So our recommendation to the government to solve this problem, to make legislative amendments to the decrees, governmental decrees regarding quarantine measures, because it's a specific problem due to quarantine. And the second part of my presentation will be dedicated to the administrative fines for violating of the procedure for entering and leaving the temporarily occupied territory, or NGCA, as I mentioned. I'd like to say that this problem is not new for persons residing on NGCA. However, it became sharp and it became acute regarding quarantine measures. According to Ukrainian legislation, entrance and leaving of NGCA must be made exclusively through the ECPs. It is forbidden to cross the line of contact outside the designated entry-exit checkpoints. In February 2018, the Code of Ukraine on Administrative Offenses was supplemented by Article 204 and 2, which established an administrative responsibility for violating this procedure. Since then, people who entered or left the NGCA outside the ECPs could be held administratively liable and fined different amounts of money. The minimum is 1,700 of Ukrainian hryvnias, or $60. The maximum is 5,100 hryvnias, or $181. In case people do it again or as a part of a group, the amounts of fine increase, of course. Why I said that this problem became acute due to quarantine measures, because the number of administrative offenses began to increase because of the following reasons. Limited functioning of ECP after their reopening in June. And the other problem is that the borders between so-called republics have been closed now. So there is a close between Luhansk and Donetsk NGCA regions. In this case, people living in the so-called Republic in Donetsk region could not use the road through the NGCA of Lugansk region to get to the checkpoint Stanitsa Luhanska. And because of this, they are forced to go through an uncontrolled part of the Ukrainian-Russian border to Russia and come back from Russia to Ukraine. That's why when they come to government-controlled territory of Ukraine, they can be fined. They can be the fine can be imposed on them because they, in terms of legislative requirements, they violated this procedure of crossing the line of contact. And I'd like to give you some numbers just to imagine the situation. For instance, last year, there were only 584 such cases in last year in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. And for 9 months of this year, 2020, the number has been increased. It's slightly, but it has 611 cases. But if we say this, if we show, if we observe the situation in Ukraine, throughout Ukraine, because we can see that more than 6,000 protocols of administrative violation have been introduced to persons who arrive from NGCA. And especially the other numbers illustrate how the situation has been changed since last time. For instance, in January 2019, there were only 68 such protocols. In January 2020, 390 protocols. In September last year, only 447 protocols have been introduced to individuals, but in September 2020, more than almost 2,000 of protocols, 1,703. So we can see that the number of protocols and the number of administrative fines imposed on persons who cross, who have to violate. Actually, they have they don't have another choice but to violate this procedure because the internal borders between so-called republics are closed. So, and we can see how the closing of ECPs from Ukrainian side as well, not only from the part of NGCA, but from GCA, how that influenced the situation regarding administrative responsibility of persons. Fortunately, I must say, maybe it's the last point, I must say that Ukrainian courts give their decisions in favor of individuals because they have some legal reasons. So so we can see that even if state border officers impose fines towards individuals, Ukrainian courts cancel those decisions. Yes, and the last phrase, I see you, yeah, I overviewed my time. I want to say that people living on NGCA, they have become hostages of the situation and quarantine measures, and their opportunities to leave NGCA towards GCA are much narrower now than they were before in March 2020. Thank you thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elina, for giving us all the details of the complexities of the situation on the border there, how difficult it is to cross the Ukrainian border from the occupied territories, and for making some suggestions as well. So I will now, without any delay, give the floor to Viktor Jelensky, if he's on board. Viktor? Yes, it was to be Maxim Vassin, but he, to talk about the situation of religious freedom in the occupied territories. But yesterday he contacted us saying that he had flu, and we were told that he would be replaced by Viktor Jelensky. We've known each other for a long time, He's a member of the parliament in Ukraine. I saw that he had been on board. Yes, I see him.
What is?
Hello?
Could you hear me?
Yes, yes, Victor, welcome on
Okay.
board. Just to say that he's a well-known Ukrainian scholar and a public figure in Ukraine and an expert in religious studies and many other things as well. But I will give him the floor to him right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Indeed, I'm going to be I see my mission within the couple of minutes to be the voice of voiceless people, because a lot of priests, pastors, imams, and other clerics keep silence about the persecution in occupied territory. Many of them had a great and sad memory about torturing, about jail, about intimidation, and so on and so forth. What is interesting, I dedicated my first PhD thesis to evangelicals in the late Brezhnev era Soviet Union. And I'm absolutely friendly that now repression and persecution much more severe and much more brutal than compared to Brezhnev era, much more. First of all, since 2014, Russian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, it was stressed that only of Moscow Patriarchate is dominant and only church in the territory, first of all, Donetsk, so-called Donetsk Republic, and then to Luhansk Republic. In the first edition of Donetsk so-called constitution, this provision was borrowed completely from the Tsarist legal code, from legal code established in the mid of 18th century. Now, second wave or dimension of persecution is that all evangelicals, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostals, Baptists, and so on and so forth, are under suspicious as pro-Ukrainian Nazi elements who allegedly have their masters in the West. So the persecution of these so-called spies is legally open as a real hunt for these people. Every single month, I have information from this site about the persecution, about the intimidation, about the interrogation, about the search in prayer houses. Third is the infrastructure. Infrastructure, by the way, in the territory of Donetsk Oblast, prior 2014, 43% of all registered religious communities, in plural, were created by Protestant, high Protestant or late Protestant by Mormons, 43%. Now, the rather rich infrastructure of Protestant communities destroyed. A long list of prayer houses, rehabilitation centers, Donetsk Christian universities, and so on and so forth, were confiscated, and many of them turned into the military cases or military usage. And what I would like to stress separately and exclusively is the fate of Jehovah's Witnesses. Why Jehovah's Witnesses? Because evangelicals have their own lobby. There are dozens of congressmen and senators in the U.S. House who are Baptists, Pentecostals, Mormons, but no one Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah's Witnesses are the after the Kievan Patriarchate and now Orthodox Church of Ukraine are the main target of occupying administration. Recently, my informator, let's say, told me a story which absolutely shocked me. Officer from so-called MGB of Donetsk Republic visited home of Jehovah's Witness and asked him, okay, what is really Jehovah's Witness is? What is your doctrine? What is your faith? What is your religious practice? And this man sincerely described him, explained what is Jehovah's Witness, what is their faith, and so on and so forth. After them, this officer reported to his office that Jehovah's Witness try to recruit him into the extremist organization, and this man was sentenced. Jehovah's Witnesses are under the cruel repression all over the Russian Federation and in occupying territory of Donbass and Crimea. Even they cannot even use the civil service instead of military service, because people in military said them normally that if you will change your faith, you would have such a opportunity to have civil non-military service. So Jehovah's Witnesses, I remember Soviet practice. Jehovah's Witnesses got, let's say, 3.5 years in prison. Now they had recently 8 years in prison, 9 years in prison. It's much more, let me stress again, much more severe and much more cruel than in Soviet time. What concern evangelicals and Muslims? Not only evangelicals, but another Protestants also. There is practice of so-called re-registration of religious communities. These re-registrations need to be approved by expert, which is extremely hard to go through, because once again, all evangelicals are under the suspicious, because they have two masters. One master in the West and another master in Kiev, which poisoned by ultra-nationalist Ukrainian propaganda. So many people, communities which are under the 30 members are not registered at all.
Can you conclude?
Concluding several words to conclusion.
Yes, yeah, sure, please do.
What we need to have, what should be the action, in my opinion. First of all, we need special thematic report of special monitoring mission of OSCE. This is urgently needed. Another, we need, and I spoke about this opportunity to many people, we need special program of shelter or asylum in the territory of Ukraine, people who are persecuted on religious ground. It's not so expensive, but it would be extremely useful for these persecuted people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor, for your detailed explanations and this quite a number of news that I was not aware of about evangelicals and mainly also Jehovah's Witnesses. And now I will, sorry, I'm going so far, but I will give the floor to Alexandra Matviichuk.
Thank you very much. I will ask Hans to help me with presentation and share it with all participants.
Coming up, just a second. You should see that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I can see.
My name is Alexandra Matviichuk. I'm a human rights defender and I represent Center for Civil Liberties. It's a Ukrainian organization who deal with the problems of detainees and places of illegal detention in occupied Donbas since the beginning of the war. The next slide, please. When the war started, we monitored the deliberate policy of terror against civilians, and this policy have a clear roots. The illegal armed formation has to physically liquidate the active minorities which can suppress the occupation and send the message to passive majority to stay calm. And in order to do it, they start to create the illegal place of detention, the widespread practice of kidnapping and tortured people. And maybe you remember the first victims of this war, the civilian hostages, local deputy Volodymyr Rybak, who was very totally killed by armed groups guided by Igor Girkin Strelkov, and this was only the first death which opened the way for this deliberated policy. Next slide, please. We see that under risk there are several different groups, and this group are belonging different people according different criteria. It's about political views, for example, people who have pro-Ukrainian position, people who belong to a certain category, for example, priests not of the Moscow Patriarchate, people who have active position, for example, post something in social networks, people who have some money, the ransom size of property, unfortunately, also very widespread. And the last group is violation of the so-called laws of war. For example, people who violate the curfew can also be kidnapped and tortured. But for my huge surprise, when I spoke personally with detainees who were released from the captivity, I understood that there is no scenario, no algorithm how you have to behave or not to be a target of such kind of persecution. Some people were kidnapped only because they crossed the road between the car in which the head of paramilitary unit was, and he didn't like this and can arrested people. Or some people were arrested because they were too suspicious, or because they made a photo of some cafe and it was suspicious, or because their skin were too burnt with sun and it was suspicious. So the main shock for me was the understanding that there is no scenario how you have to behave to avoid this destiny. Next slide, please. Here you see some numbers which are in our first reports when we provide testimonies from 165 people, and we spoke with people who were held in different place of detention in occupied Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts, and majority of these places are not even appropriate for the short term of detainees of people, because people are held in basement, hangars, garage, even severe collector and cage. And for that time of our report, we saw that every second civilian were subject to torture and ill treatment, and this means that it's an organized system of kidnapping and torture in the occupied territories. Unfortunately, this practice still continues. The numbers are different for current moment, and the official, according to official data of Security Service of Ukraine, we have 251 people, but on my opinion, it's only a top of iceberg. We don't know the real number of people who were kidnapped and held in this illegal place. Next slide, please. Here's a quote of Donetsk journalist Stanislav Aseyev, who was released during the last prisoners exchange in December 2019. And he described the place and detention facilities where he was held. But I want to draw your attention to his quote when he described the stand post in Donetsk CISO, which is the worst one. And you can imagine what is the detention facilities where you have rats, where you have savage overflow into the cell, where no light, no fresh air, because this place are located in basement, and how cruel is to kept people in such detention facilities, because only to be in such facilities is a torture according to the international standard. Next slide, please. I personally spoke with more than several hundreds of people who were released from captivity, and when we speak about torture and ill treatment, we don't speak only about beating. I spoke with people who were raped, whose fingers were cut, who were smashed into wooden boxes, whose eyes were pulled out with spoon. So it's a very cruel, different methods of torture. You can write more about them in our reports or in official reports of UN Mission on Human Rights, who interviewed released detainees from the occupied Donbas. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, we can also say that gender-based violence are very widespread, and it's cover women and men. And I, on the slide, show you several testimonies which provide us by women. And the first testimonies, it was done by Ukrainian women who volunteer. And she said that I asked not to beat me, saying that I was pregnant. They say very well this uklop, which means Ukrainian child will die. They were beaten by different objects. They beat us over the body. Because I was looking at the beating and shout and was screaming, so they closed my eyes with a tape. I started bleeding. I lost conscience. So we see that different kind of gender-based violence can occur in this place of detention. Next slide, please. I would like to stress your attention to some secret prison isolation in Donetsk. Which is not secret, because about these horrible things, very well-known international organization, human rights organization, but it's still functioning in the territory of military base. We know from the Stanislav Aseev, the quote of him I mentioned before, that up to 18 people can be held at the same time. And these people are mostly civilian hostages. And on that moment when this Donetsk journalist was in isolation, 30% of prisoners were women. It's very important to mention that they are taken in isolation, because even International Committee of Red Cross has no access to them. They are in this place for detention for years with any external connection with their relatives, friends, or representative international organization. They are forced to perform the work. For example, they build military training grounds or wash military equipment. Stanislav Aseev told us that it was a period when they have no eat. They receive only 50 grams of bread per day. And also it's very important to mention that in last report of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights describe a very cruel and methods of tortures which used in isolation. But I don't want to mention it, you can read it in this slide, but I want to mention that when I spoke with people who were released from isolation, they told me that one of the most cruel methods of torture for them was to see how they torture another people, how these another people are screening. And Stanislav Aseev mentioned that the prison administration intentionally broadcast the torture in the basement via the monitor screen that was located on the same floor as the cells. Next slide, please. All of us now in a danger because of situation, but I must admit that people in illegal place of detention are the most vulnerable to this pandemic, because the quality of medical care, as you understand, is very poor. According to the testimony from UNHCR, some detainees see medical workers only one time during their torturing and interrogation. For example, I put in the slide the testimony of people from this report that this medical worker revived those who had lost conscience and pointed out how to torture in order to inflict the greatest pain, but not to cause the death. So you must understand that there is no illusion that there will be any medical assistance in case of spread of coronavirus in such kind of places. And we are afraid what the measure will be undertaken to deter the spread of the coronavirus in such measures when the human life not matter at all. Next slide, please. Before I go to recommendation and our conclusion, I would like to point that according to the annual report of Office of Prosecutor Office of International Criminal Court, at least on August 2014, they observed in Donbass the international armed conflict. And we have a lot of evidence that so-called Lugansk and Donetsk People Republic exist only because of different kind of Russian support, and they are not independent in decision-making. According to the law point of view, Russia maintains overall control over the controlled armed formation and effective control over their military operation. That's why Russian Federation is actually occupies and controls certain parts of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast and responsible for all this human rights violation. And the last slide, please. The situation, frankly speaking, is awful, and there is no clear solution what we can do in order to save life of these people. But there is a clear steps what we have to demand from Russian Federation. The first, to provide the access to detainees for international intergovernmental organization, in particular International Committee of Red Cross. And frankly speaking, I have no understanding why on the 7th year of war, the international community couldn't press Russia to do it, because we know that International Committee of Red Cross has access in different armed conflicts, which is much severe, but not in Donbass, and it's not understandable for us. Second, we have to urge the Russian Federation, which exercised effective control over this region, to fulfill the provision of Minsk Agreement and immediate release of people which freedom is restricted because of the involvement in the armed conflict. I told you earlier that it's not only military. The majority of them are civilians. There are people, men, women, children, people from different age and state conditions. And we have dozens of cases where people now in so bad health state that we have a real afraid that they have no time to wait for the next round of negotiation because they can die. I know cases of people which backbone are broken, the people who has oncology, the people who are paralyzed after torture. So I think that it's good to raise question that these people has to be released not in an exchange process, but for humanitarian ground without any exchange, because they will die and they have no time to wait. And the last, but not the least, we need to demand from Russian Federation to close all these illegal detention centers. And it's a good point to start to close the isolation in Donetsk. Everybody knows the address. Everybody knows what's going on. We need to stop this secret prison functioning and ask to generally stop the illegal practice of torture detainees in occupied Donbass. I will stop here and I will be glad to answer to your question.
So thank you very much for your rich and precious contribution to our awareness making operation. I would like just to make a very short comment to say that, and that will be an answer to a written question coming from the advisor to the president of the Czech Republic. I will come back to each of you, and we will publish in one way or another the findings of your investigation in the occupied territories of Donbass with your recommendations. And we'll do that through two channels: our newsletter that reaches 10,000 people and institutions, all members of the European Parliament and members of parliaments of 15 member states of the EU, plus journalists, think tanks, and so on. And also the other channel, we have some good contacts with media outlets in the EU bubble, and we will also make sure that a few articles based on your research appear in those media. I saw that there was a question coming addressed to Viktor Jelensky. Apparently, there was something that was not understood quite well. Just ask, can you clarify, am I correct that you are saying that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, not Moscow Patriarchate, are active in persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses?
No, no, no.
I think there's an understanding, huh? Yes.
No, no. Of course, no. Of course, no. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine is under the great pressure of occupying forces and under the pressure of Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. And recently, I asked Bishop of Moscow Patriarchate about the fate of priests and faithful of Orthodox Church of Ukraine in the territory of so-called Donetsk Republic, and he cynically replied, "What kind of Orthodox Church of Ukraine? We have any." So they try to demolish all remnants, let's say, of Kievan Patriarchate and of Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Recently, one temple, one cathedral in Telmanovsky Rayon was confiscated and transferred to Moscow Patriarchate from Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And additionally, the great campaign against the ecumenical patriarch who granted autocephaly to Orthodox Church of Ukraine, spread it over the not only Russia but also over the occupying territory and territories, and spread it over the Crimea, where Orthodox Church of Ukraine has a great problem. It's another story.
Thank you very much, Victor. Hans, can you see if anybody wants to ask an oral question? I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, there was only a question still about the main purpose of the meeting. Was it to draw attention, to draw awareness, or is it to kick off initiatives?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps any of the speakers can give answer to this.
Yeah, maybe some of the speakers can comment on one point.
I can start. I have my personal motivation to take part in this.
Yes, please explain. Yes.
In this presentation, because as a people who for years work with relatives of hostages, and I'm really have a great empathy for people's pain. I would like to have any advice from you as a representative of different states. What can be done additionally to release these people, or at least to provide them a possibility to survive until the methods of release? And especially we have these numbers of people who has to be released immediately on the humanitarian ground. Majority of them are women. And if you have any ideas how to we can achieve it, I will provide my contact to organizers and will be glad to speak after this meeting more precisely about it.
Really, I think we can put it in our newsletter, can't we? And raise awareness.
Yes, you know, there's a lot that we can do together. For sure, we will talk again after or another day and by email as well about what we can do. Information is first and absolutely important. Then to be able to develop targeted advocacy. But then we can go into the details in a private meeting.
Dennis Allen asks if there's any collaboration between Kiev and the separatist republics to combat the spread of COVID-19 in the Donbas region. Anybody who knows more about this?
Is there any cooperation between Kiev and...
No, there is no any collaboration. They are totally closed and isolated. And even those we see what is happening at checkpoints in the contact line, that there is no any understanding from military group controlled by Russia. Why do people need these crossings now? So it is totally unreal. And I also want to say that this Alexandra stressed this important thing to find new ways of pressing on Russia to, for example, close this terrible prison isolation. And sometimes we see that Western audience is not aware good at what is happening in those prisons.
I agree, fully agree, yes. And that's why we need the people who know exactly what is happening, who are on the ground and can report very accurately, as you did this afternoon, so that we can transform that information in a language that is, I would say, easy to understand for the political decision makers in Brussels and beyond. Any other?
Yes,
reaction?
I'd like to say that Alexandra and Tatiana said they aim why they participate in this event. I'd like to say that from my part, of the organization I'm representing here, it's a way, it's a thing that how can we show you the situation with crossings and the freedom of movement through the line of contact. And how the situation is for persons arriving from NGCA to GCA and which obstacles they face. So, and what challenges they face in terms of crossing, in terms of freedom of movement, restricted freedom of movement due to quarantine measures. So it's one of the ways to show our position, to illustrate the situation, and actually, yes, to find new ways to solve the problem. Because regarding residents of NGCA and IDPs who have the status of IDP in Ukraine, we need to solve this problem that was like made by Ukrainian governmental decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's one of my points to participate in this event and to show you the situation.
Yeah.
And I'll also like to emphasize that sometimes people, not only in Europe, but also in Ukraine, think that if military do not die, the war is ended. But it is not so, in fact. Even if military do not die, but when people are civilians are tortured in prisons and people are deprived from elementary rights, war continues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there one more question, Hans?
There's one more question from Jerry Packhurst. Beyond diplomacy, what are the specific leverages that we can exert on Russia to get some movement in these terrible situations?
I think that's a good question. But the answer is more difficult to give. I think that our panelist, maybe Victor or another panelist,
just a couple words.
Yes.
I do believe that sanctions works and the pressure works, even in the level of religious persecution. For example, the great pressure of Jewish communities and Jewish as secular and religious communities over Russia, from the side of Western diplomats, from the side of Israeli diplomats, demand to remove Jewish community in Donetsk from the list of suspicious organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of late Zakharchenko proclaimed that bad Judaists and so on make a lot of bad things for our Muslims and so on, and so such a rhetoric, this community was removed from this list. It's not in good condition, of course. More than 80% leave Donetsk and move to Israel or to Ukrainian territory where the special camp was built near the Kiev. But anyway, so I do believe the sanction works, and I do believe that pressure also works.
Thank you, Victor.
I continue if you allowed.
Yes, please.
Very small remark. I have no clear answer to this very important question, but I think the West have no answer because the West have no strategy to Russia. We see only some reactive measures, some responsive measures. I think that it's time to think and to elaborate such kind of strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree with you. The West has no strategy concerning what's happening in Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. Absolutely. So awareness is absolutely important, and accurate and full information to be spread around is absolutely vital to help you in your difficult and dangerous fight, because I'm sure that sometimes you risk your life or to be arrested when you, let's say, travel beyond the line of contact.
I can add that Western world should be more careful with information in this situation of informational war, but because sometimes when we see how aggressive Russian propaganda spreads through the Western world, we are shocked and we do not understand why they cannot counteract effective to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Your diagnosis is absolutely correct, and I agree with you. So we must work together, hand in hand, on these issues, and give a lot of visibility to what you have raised this afternoon. Now, I want to thank you very much, because Hans has another webinar in a few minutes, and that's why it was a little bit short, this session, 1 hour and 15 minutes. Okay, yeah. I think it deserves more time, but we can maybe plan another one in a few weeks or after New Year. Thank you absolutely very much for your work, for your contribution, for sharing this information with us. And we can be your voice in Brussels and beyond, and we will be. Thank you very much, all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For your information, we will make sure there's a link available for the web of the video on this conference, and we'll send that to you.
Yeah, and the report, yeah, and the report by Olga Alexandrovskaya, that was the starting point of my interest for the situation. We will also put it at the disposal of all those who registered for the event today, including those who were not able finally to attend it. Okay, so thank you very much. Have a nice evening, and we'll be in touch very soon. You can be sure. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.